Stephen,
Yes.
I'm not to put any pressure on you, but we should point out that only did Stephen present this paper at the Dean's Conference. This was the award-winning paper.
Okay. And the way my head is today, I'm not sure whether anything will come out straight, but never mind. So if you want a link to the paper, not this presentation, but the whole paper, I've made a link to it using bit.ly, so it's http://bit.ly/mahara_dean16. So if you follow that link, you'll get the full paper, which will also be published obviously in the conference proceedings and possibly the Dean's Journal as well. But you can have a kind of first look at it there. So everything I'm going to say is in the paper, so I don't believe in kind of trying to recap all of the content in a 25-minute presentation. So this is kind of the short version. And because it was a Lord of the Rings theme, we had to have an obligatory slide with something Lord of the Ringsy in it. And this one is a poem by Bilbo. I don't know, who's seen the Lord of the Rings movies? Yeah, of course you have. Oh, one or two renegas there. You're not a real New Zealand anyway. When Bilbo goes into the Prancing Pony, the public breed, and he's looking for this mysterious Strider, who's the contact that Gandalf has given him, what he's got to guide him is a poem, Frodo, is a poem by Bilbo. And the first two lines of the poem say, "All that is gold does not glitter. Not all those who wander are lost." Now you're thinking, how is he going to make a link from this to ePortfolios? And I can tell you, it's pretty tenuous, all right? But what it is ePortfolios, I think, actually give learners, whether they're students or nurses or whatever context they're in, kind of permission to wander in a way that our normal kind of, in our academic environment, we put people on a railway line, I believe. They follow the train tracks. They go through the stations of assignment 1, assignment 2, assignment 3. So they get through all of that, and at the end of it, they've kind of got the subject in some way or other. But there's really not a lot of room for them to wander. So students become very, what I call, instrumentalist in their behaviour, which is why when you start off a lecture for a group of students in an introductory session and you say to them, bloody blah, this is going to be so interesting, someone inevitably will put their hand up and say, what are the assignments, please? Because we've put them on this kind of railway track process and we don't give them permission to wander. And sometimes it's in the wandering and doing things for yourself, which is what ePortfolios let you do, that actually very valuable learning takes place. So one of the things I really like about ePortfolios is that students can construct their own stuff, which is completely separate from the assignment stuff they have to submit or anything else they have to do for the school or whatever. They can do their own little wanderings, and they may never show it to anybody, or they may. That's up to them. So social constructivism is the theoretical construct I'm looking at. One of the things that drove me to write this paper was that I started doing a little two-pager for staff here at the uni about what sorts of assignments should you give students if you're using an ePortfolio. And as I did that, because I'm quite familiar with social constructivism as a kind of an outline of theory, I kind of kept seeing matches between what the ePortfolio software could do and what social constructivism is about. And when I scanned the literature thinking, well, somebody's bound to have done that somewhere, I couldn't find anything. That may just be about my ability to use Google Scholar, but however, I couldn't find anything. So I thought, well, nobody's written, it's a gap, and I'll do something about it. So social constructivism, as the picture implies, is all about people. People are the key learning element in social constructivism because it's all about interaction with people. That's where your learning takes place. And it's, I guess, quite a different sort of approach from the one that tertiary education is highly wedded to. which is very content focused. All right, so it's about learning biology. And then when people have learned biology, you say to the student, oh, we're going to do some biology. They go, oh, I've done biology, you know, as if they could learn anything more than a teaspoon of biology in the sea of knowledge about biology. So that stuff, I think, is contrary to learning. And just as a matter of interest, I also have been recorded to say that I believe that assessment is the opium, the crack cocaine of the education system. We're addicted to it. We can't get by without it. But actually, I think it doesn't always help us with learning. So this is all about linkages between social constructivism and, in this case, Mahara, because Mahara was the software that I was most familiar with. But Mahara is an example of ePortfolio software. It's not the only one out there. John Egan and the folks at Auckland University are using a Canadian product called Chalk and Wire. People use other things like Google Sites for ePortfolios. So I'm looking at a particular ePortfolio piece of software, but there are some generalizations, I think, across other types of software. And so Mahara, I don't need to do a heck of a lot of background for this for you, I hope, but I'll do it anyway. So it's an open source ePortfolio for education. I should sort of just click the recorder on and get Christina to do this. It's the Māori word for thinking or thought. It originated in 2006 as a collaboration between Massey University, AUT, Open Poly and Victoria Uni, and it had funding from the New Zealand Tertiary Education Commission, and the project leader in that these days is mostly to do with Catalyst. So I love this quote by Kurt Lewin, because when you say to people, well, this is a concept paper, and we're going to look at theory, I'd rather have my teeth pulled without anaesthetic, you know. So what's happening here is that there's nothing so practical as a good theory. And if you get a good theory, it actually focuses and frameworks your practice, I believe. So any good theory, in my view, should actually identify and answer three questions. What, so what, now what? And if it answers those questions and it helps you with framing up your practice, then it's a good theory. And the problem I came across, because I thought I knew a fair bit about social constructivism, is that there's all these flavours of social constructivism. And as I delved more deeply into it, I found there was radical constructivism, there was co-constructivism, there was all these different flavours of social constructivism. So I took the coward's way out, and I went to a summary from a textbook. And I said, okay, this is what I mean. This is my operational definition of social constructivism. So I'm just going to let you read that. Hopefully you can see it for a minute. So you can see the social part in there all the way through, can't you? If you went through with a highlighter and highlighted all the words that are about relationship learning, then there'd be a lot of highlighting in there. And so the whole business of social constructivism is this business of learning as part of a community of learning, not learning in isolation. Yes, you can go on YouTube and learn how to do something, but learning in isolation is slightly different from learning as part of a community of learning, and I guess that's partly what we're on about today. This is part of the Mahara community of learning, and together in your groups before lunch, you learn things from each other. You probably learn things you would have been hard put to learn if you'd actually gone on to Google or YouTube or whatever. So what I've done here, and I'm sorry if it's a little bit kind of binoculars at the back, what I've done here is this is a sample out of the table I made. I took all those previous items that you've just read about social constructivism, and then I've looked at the Mahara software and I've said, well, what in the Mahara software helps you do this in a social constructivist kind of theme? And what helps you do that? And when I'd worked through my list of items, I found that I actually had something alongside every one, which for me was at least some anecdotal evidence that there is a good match between the conceptual framework of social constructivism and the actual things you can do in ePortfolio software that's specifically designed for ePortfolios like Mahara. So can you read that? Okay. So what you've got a little social constructivist task now, because obviously if I'm into social constructivism, it's not all about blah 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 from the front. So what you've got to do is pick one of these themes and then look at the conclusion I've made about Mahara's affordances, what it can do, and decide, have a talk with your neighbour about it, decide whether you think the theme and the affordances, whether the link is weak, average, or strong. Okay, weak, average, or strong. So have a chat with your neighbour for a minute. So somebody like to volunteer for the first one? Someone who discussed the first one, or a couple of people? What were your thoughts about that? In Māori you would say, te heo whakaro mo tēnei. What are your thoughts about this?
I can start off with
yes, sure.
Using Mahara for portfolios for nursing students. That if they're used from the beginning of an undergraduate program, then they can be followed throughout the whole of their degree, and can look back and reflect over their practice and how they've developed over those years. So it can be a very strong link.
So there's that longitudinal aspect that you don't get when you, typically in the academic environment, we chop things up into subject topics and then we sort of disintegrate it rather than collaborate it. Yeah, no, that's good. Thanks for that. Yeah?
Stephen, we thought that probably the connection there was moderate rather than strong.
Yes.
Simply because I totally agree that you've got all of that there when you compare it to a course-related, like a learning management system, where it's course-based, you lose the continuity. But there's nothing really forcing the reflection or the...
No, that's true.
The time...
That's a good point, Mark.
Within Mahara.
No.
Like, it can be done.
Yes.
And it's definitely there, but there's no...
But it's the operator element,
Yeah,
isn't it? Yeah, it's not inherent to the software. No, I think that's a good point. So it is possible, it's just not mandatory.
Yeah.
Cool. Second one, anybody want to make some comments about the second item?
We thought that the link is really strong
Mm-hmm.
because you can have different purposes for a tool.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact that links with number one above, with your example for number one above as well. So if that was your context for the multi-year undergraduate programs, then it would be just as valid as the examples that you've got in number two.
Yep, absolutely. And maybe also contextualise differently according to whether your major purpose, say for example in the DHB environment, might be for professional development and accreditation in relation to your compulsory development requirements. So you've got that context to work in, but it can apply to different contexts. Okay. Third one. So,
our opinion is it's probably can put it as consistent because of the nature of how Mahara is. But I'm still trying to get my head around the social constructivism.
okay.
So how does is it supported or does it just be inconsistent?
Yeah, I guess that's a good point. You know, is there a difference in terms of, is it simply, yes, this is congruent with something, or does it promote it? Yeah, and I'd have to do a bit of thinking about that. That's quite a good question. Okay, and the third one, anyone like to make a comment about that?
Yes, the learning as an active process is what we think learning is. The connection with ePortfolio allows it to happen, doesn't force it to happen,
Yeah.
and you can end up with a situation where the whole pile of material from a learner can be from other sources that's shown that on
Yep.
the portfolio without
Sure.
going through the instruction process.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's, again, I guess that's the critical element of who's guiding and mentoring this process. Like, are they setting up things which take advantage of the affordances and have a clear theoretical framework? Or is it just being used as a kind of library/dumping ground for things that people are required to do? Because I agree completely. I think what I say in the introduction session I do with students is that ePortfolio is only half an ePortfolio if you haven't got some means of doing reflection as part of it. Reflection is a key component in an ePortfolio.
Deacon, we've also thought about the social constructivism
Yeah.
in the sense of how the affordances of the electronics still enable you to be social.
Yeah.
You don't have to have that face-to-face interaction.
Sure.
Social constructivism to be in place.
Sure. No, absolutely. So being able to share a page with whoever you like.
Yeah.
And it might be your teacher because you're required to do that, or your supervisor because you're required to do that. But it also could just be with your friend because you want an opinion from a peer. Like, what do you think of this? Oh, lots of text. Oh, look, I'm going to do something about it.
That right-hand side suggests a lot of agency.
Yeah.
And I think there are situations, particularly where it's used for assessment, where that agency is taken away entirely. So that, it's defined what you were going to collect. It's defined how long you're going to share it for, who you're going to share it with.
Yeah.
So
Here's the template, this is what you've got to do.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so you're right, Nigel, and I guess that's the different contexts. We tend to, we put them back on the railway track, we just got a different set of carriages.
It doesn't have to be like
No, but it doesn't have to be like that, does it? That's more our problem than the software's problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last one, anyone like to make some comments on that? Yes, Sean.
I think it's with the different generations in IT. Some people learn better through pictorial videos.
Yeah.
So Mahara gives you the ability to use a wide range of media. I've just embarked on postgraduate study, and it's been fascinating. I'm not a Facebook user, but one of our assignments was actually to collaborate with American colleagues to put together a video presentation of the strategy. And initially I found that quite hard, but the more I did it, we actually had some fantastic outcomes. So it allowed us to collaborate with people internationally.
Yes.
And I think the use of Mahara allowed that sort of,
So that was a kind of enabler for you.
yes, yeah. So, and the millennials, the younger generation, are used to, video and YouTube. We need to become more IT savvy.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, so that's about the sort of digital literacy stuff, isn't it? Like, what's our levels of digital literacies in our various environments, and are we going to have to drag our colleagues or other workers kicking and screaming into the 21st century? And sometimes I think the answer to that is yes.
The other thing, two things that came to mind, it's also the reason why it is used, and the authenticity of the purpose. How you're describing something, you had to build something with others to get to there. So that was a bigger purpose than just the use of the tool initially. Another aspect on that fourth point there is that it's the user as a creator of content, and that Mahara allows for that aggregation. So it can be anywhere where the user is actually comfortable.
Sure. Yeah. So, as you can see, this is just a sample. This is not all of the points that I had sort of listed for social constructivism. If you want to see the whole table, which is really the guts of the paper, then if you go to that bit.ly address, you'll be able to read through the paper and see how I've sort of argued for that. So, that's a bit about the what, so what. I think the now what is, what does this mean? And one of the things that drove this paper originally was talking to staff who were thinking of using ePortfolios with their students for assessment, and having this conversation with them about what are you going to do, and is an e-portfolio the best way to do this? And that's a conversation that I think people like the folks at AUT have recognised needs to happen before the teacher dives in and rings you up and says, I'd like 30 accounts please. Because actually they need to know what e-portfolios do best, and then whether what they're trying to do with the e-portfolio is a good idea or not. It's kind of like gardening. When you're new to gardening, or you're a little child, you might think you're going to dig a hole, so you choose a rake. Now, you'll get there eventually, but it's going to be a heck of a tough job. If you'd chosen the shovel or the trowel, you'd be in a lot better position. So it's that kind of thing of horses for courses. So looking at if you accept my thesis, that social constructivism with those kinds of learning themes has a measure of congruence with ePortfolio software, then the conclusion from that is that these kinds of assignments and processes are the kinds of things that you would do best in an ePortfolio environment. Doesn't mean you can't use it for other things as well, but these kinds of assignments are actually optimal because they're congruent not only with the learning framework that matches the software and the affordances of the software itself. So things like group work, which Richard and several other people, Marilyn, have done quite a bit of. Learning journals, which are shared with other people. Things like field work, practicum reports. We have an engineering program here where the students go out over the summer, they collect pictures, videos, write bits about their fieldwork placement in a firm, and then the next paper they do has a requirement to produce an e-portfolio reflecting on that placement in an engineering firm. Problem-solving assignments. I think we kind of are trying to move, away from content more towards things which involve real, or as far as is possible, authentic problems. So things like case studies are a classic of that. Resource portfolios. I've seen one or two of these which work really well. I used to do this in Moodle where I'd set up a forum where I'd say, okay, everybody has to post 3 resources on learning theory, and then say whether they think they're good or bad and why. And you'd get sort of all the students would post. But you could do that really easily in an ePortfolio page. And then you can invite other people to comment on it. And finally, showcase portfolios, which is a familiar term for some of you. The idea that students are preparing, or people that are in a work position, prepare something which is like an extended or enhanced CV, which means that when they need to show something to an employer which is more than just the 2-page A4, they can say, here's the link, click on it, go and have a look. And Mahara's got a really nice process for that, called making a secret URL. So these things, I think, are the so what, now what sort of part of the presentation. And at that point, I'll invite any questions or comments you may have. So,
can I just sort of add to that, which I think is one kind of summary of what Mahara can do, but for me, my sort of perennial hobby horse is that last word you've got in the heading. It's about assessment.
Yep.
So if you are wanting to encourage some kind of social constructivist learning, but you still have a 20th century assessment strategy, it's just not going to happen. So the critical point is about the idea of authentic assessment. I mean, a lot of those things you've got there about the reports, the learning journals, the portfolios and so on, they are all part and parcel of developing a strategy that does support 21st century learning.
Sure.
And we battle with it all the time, and I'm sure you do as well, that you go and you talk to somebody about how they can make the best use of portfolio or learning management system, whatever, and you find they've got a 3-hour exam.
Yes.
Or they're just speaking the
where they handwrite. Yeah, that's authentic. You do lots of handwriting these days. We all do, don't we?
Yeah. So, it's chicken and egg, but it's not the only one that's going to work without the other.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Yes?
My question relates to something that you said towards the beginning, which was the variety of ePortfolios that are around. And I've seen some people say that you could use Google with all its apps, etc., Google Classroom. But much though I love Google Plus and all of that, and create collections, I don't see, and I'm just wondering whether you see Google as effective, as being as effective as Mahara for the construction of an ePortfolio. I was just trying to think back to your table and mentally map across. And what's your opinion?
Well, I think people do use a whole range of tools, and often it's more pragmatic. It's like, what have we got? So if you're in a situation where you're a Google institution and that's what you've got, well then you're going to use some kind of Google tool. But it does seem, I would be of a similar opinion to you, that there are some advantages with using something that's been tailored for the task, rather than trying to use, the proverbial Swiss Army knife to carve the roast. Yes, you can do it, but it's maybe not optimal. But yeah, people do use a whole heap of different things, Evernote, OneNote, the list goes on and
I
on.
think it's not just about what you've got, it's about what you know as well. A lot of our teachers stick with platforms that they're used to, that they're familiar with, as opposed to venturing.
That's right. That's why students these days are being afflicted with a tsunami of PowerPoint presentations as a particular, to show that we're doing a different assessment task. Yeah, absolutely. Yep, one more and then we'll have to move on.
Comment and the question. First, the comment is, I think, the key word in a lot of what you've been talking about is affordances. Because the tool itself can't actually make it social constructivist or constrain you in those ways. All it can do is provide the opportunities for that to happen. And it's up to either the user or the person who's crafted the tasks to make it happen. So I think thinking of it in those terms kind of gets around some of those concerns that were raised earlier about whether you had to do it or whether it allowed it. Second thing is a question. And what you've been talking about, you've been applying the social constructivist ideas to Mahara, if I understand it. And the question is, are you thinking of ePortfolios in terms of the piece of software or the tool that allows you to produce an ePortfolio? Or are you talking about it in terms of the concept of an ePortfolio, which is sort of collection, etc.?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think both of those are somehow embedded in there. Maybe not explicitly, but the concept of ePortfolios, in a sense, you take the social constructivist framework, from that you get the concepts which encompass the ePortfolio kind of approach, which then leads you to what am I going to use to do this stuff, which then leads you to how am I going to structure, in this case, my assessment to kind of match up with all those parts of the chain. But I do agree. I think I agree with your idea that the concept of ePortfolios is just as important, or perhaps more important, as the kind of actual software item itself. Because if you haven't got I see it a lot with lecturers and teachers, if they haven't got a good idea of what ePortfolios are about, then when they try and construct something which is assessment, it tends to be a bit of a kind of glue together and the wheels fall off.
Or you could use an ePortfolio tool in a way that's not producing an ePortfolio.
Absolutely, yes, you can certainly do that. Okay, so thanks for your feedback, and that's my presentation.
Back to the feedback.
But then, yeah, sure.